There are places in the Appalachians where daylight and darkness bleed together, where the trees grow so tightly that they choke the wind itself. The forest is so dense that even screams and cries for help can't escape, swallowed whole by moss and shadow. The air feels heavier there, old, knowing, as if it remembers every voice that's ever begged to be found. These mountains are older than the Rockies, older than the bones of the sea. They've watched empires rise and crumble, and they've devoured more souls than history dares to count. Every ridge has a name, every hollow has a story, and some of those stories start the same way. A single step off the trail, a moment of silence, and someone who never comes back. Families search, rangers comb the woods, but the mountains, they keep what they want. Some say it's nature, predators, weather, human error. Others whisper about what moves deeper in the hills. Things older than memory, watching from the tree line. Out here, every disappearance grows its own legend, fed by silence and fear. The forest listens, and sometimes it answers. Welcome back to Darkly Speaking. My name is Alex Kern, and tonight I want to take you with me deep into the heart of Appalachia. We'll move through its winding trails and quiet hollows, following the stories of those the mountains chose to keep. From the disappearances of Dennis Martin and Trenny Gibson to the legends that grew from their silence, we'll uncover the mysteries buried beneath centuries of earth and folklore. Because here, in these ancient hills, the line between man and monster has never been clear. This is the story of the ones the mountains keep. There's something about the Appalachian Mountains that feels alive. The way the fog curls low over the ridgelines, the way the wind carries through the hollers like it's whispering a name you almost recognize. Thunder rolls somewhere off in the distance and the trees sway like they're answering back. The Appalachian Mountains stretch for more than 2,000 miles, a weathered spine running the length of the eastern United States, from the heavy, humid air of Alabama and Georgia to the cold, still forests of Maine, and even beyond, across the Atlantic to the rugged cliffs of Newfoundland and the windswept hills of the Scottish Highlands. Long before the world split apart, these lands were one. Geologists believe that the Appalachians, Newfoundland, and the Highlands were once connected, part of a colossal range called the Central Pangaean Mountains, formed when all the continents were fused together. A reminder that even the land itself carries memory and that some things were never meant to be separate. Parts of these mountains began forming over 1 billion years ago. The mountain range itself is around 480 million years old, older than the bones of the dinosaurs themselves, older than the entire species of trees that now cover them, carved by time, weather, and stories. They've seen settlers, miners, witch trials, and vanishings, and they're still listening. To those who have lived here the longest, the Cherokee, Shawnee, and Creek, these peaks have always been sacred. Spirit mountains, they call it. Home to the little people, small supernatural beings from Cherokee and other indigenous traditions, said to live deep in the mountains and forests, to shapeshifters, to forces that exist somewhere between the seen and the unseen. Their myths are older than any colonial map or European tale, and their reverence for this land runs deeper than any river that cuts through it. Then came the settlers. They brought Puritan superstition, European ghost lore, and the weight of Christianity. And somewhere between the hymns and the howls, a new folklore took root, one stitched together from fear, faith, and survival. Centuries later, that blend of belief and superstition would find its pathway written into the land itself. The Appalachian Trail became a kind of artery through it all, a thread, so to speak, connecting centuries of human stories, running straight through the heart of a land that never stopped breathing. Stretching roughly 2,200 miles from Springer Mountain in Georgia to Mount Katahdin in Maine, the trail draws over 3 million hikers each year. Yet only a few thousand complete the full journey, end to end, walking the ancient spine of the mountains from one edge of the country to the other. Because this place isn't just wilderness, it's a witness. And it was already old before we even named it. And it never forgets who walks on it. In Appalachia, there are rules, the kind that aren't written down but everyone seems to know. If you see something, no, you didn't. If you hear something, well, no, you didn't. Out here, silence is a kind of survival. Life in these mountains has always demanded that kind of awareness. The terrain is unforgiving, steep ridges, twisting hollers, and winters that press against the bones. Generations have built their lives here, pulling what they could from the land, mining, logging, farming, and burying their dead in the same soil that fed them. Appalachia is beautiful, but she's never been kind. Isolation became a way of life. Towns perched on the edge of cliffs, miles from the nearest neighbor, grew into their own small worlds. And in those worlds, stories became law. Tales weren't just for entertainment. They were instruction manuals, passed down to teach what to do when the forest goes quiet, when lights appear on the ridgeline, and when you hear footsteps that don't belong to you. Faith and fear coexisted here. Christianity mixed with old world superstition, with remnants of indigenous belief and folk ritual. It gave rise to granny magic, healing and hex breaking through prayer, herbs, and iron nails. A Bible on the windowsill to keep spirits from crossing the threshold. Salt poured at the door. Paint blue painted on the porch ceilings to keep restless ghosts away. The ghosts of Appalachia aren't always seen. They live in the drowned towns beneath man-made lakes, and the abandoned mines that still echo with collapse. People speak of voices deep underground, of lantern lights moving where no one walks. Every hollow has its story, and every family has its loss. Out here, there are rules. Rules everyone knows. Respect the nature. Don't go off trail after dark. Don't whistle in the woods. And never answer when something calls your name. Because if you do, you're the next story they'll tell. If you see something, no, you didn't. If you hear something, no, you didn't. The Appalachian Trail runs through the heart of it all, a meeting place of history and myth where beauty and danger walk the same path. And in 1969, a 6-year-old boy stepped into those woods and never came back. It was Father's Day weekend, June 14th, 1969, Great Smoky Mountains National Park, along the southern edge of the Appalachian Trail. Early summer light flickered through the trees, kids laughed, and the air smelled of campfire smoke and pine. It should have ended in stories told around the fire, and bug bites and roasted marshmallows. Instead, it became one of the Smokies' darkest legends. Dennis Martin was 6 years old, small for his age, brown hair, brown eyes, wearing a bright red shirt, green khaki shorts, and low-cut Oxford-style shoes. According to his father, William, Dennis also had a learning disability that put him roughly 6 months behind his peers, something that made him more cautious and shy, but also gentle and eager to please. He was camping with his father, grandfather, and older brother Doug near Spence Fields, a grassy clearing perched along the Tennessee-North Carolina border. The Martins had traveled from their hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee, and this wasn't their first trip to these woods. You see, they knew Spence Fields very well, actually. But for little Dennis, it was different. This was his very first night away from home, his very first time sleeping under the stars. For a family who'd grown up loving the mountains, it felt like the perfect Father's Day tradition. Familiar, safe, and close to home. That afternoon, they crossed paths with another family who also had young sons. The boys decided to play a prank, to split up and sneak around the adults. Dennis darted behind a bush barely 100 feet from where his father stood. He never came back out. At first, they thought he was hiding. His father called for him, laughing, expecting Dennis to jump out at any moment. But the seconds stretched on and laughter turned uneasy. His voice grew sharper, more urgent, until the sound of his own shouting was the only thing left. Minutes slipped into hours and the laughter of the day fell silent, replaced by panic. Dennis's father, William, ran nearly 2 miles down the trail, stopping at 2 nearby shelters, hoping someone might have seen his son. When no one had, he turned back, shouting until his voice gave out. Meanwhile, his grandfather Clyde hiked out toward the ranger station to raise the alarm. Within hours, a full search was underway. Rangers interviewed hikers and campers from every direction along the Appalachian Trail, but none of them had seen a trace of Dennis. The first night brought torrential rain, and over 3 inches fell in just a few hours. Flash floods tore through ravines and washed away potential tracks. Temperatures dropped into the 40s. For a 6-year-old boy lost in thin clothing, the odds were already very grim. By morning, hundreds of people had joined the search. Over the next week, that number grew to more than 1,400. Rangers, Boy Scouts, volunteers, FBI agents, and even a team of Green Berets from Fort Bragg. They scoured miles of rugged terrain, caves, sinkholes, streams, and steep ridges so dense, even dogs struggled to pass. The search stretched on for weeks. Helicopters hovered overhead, and bloodhounds were brought in. But every lead evaporated into the forest. William couldn't comprehend how his son could disappear in just the few minutes he'd been out of sight. How a child could just vanish so completely in a place so open, surrounded by people who loved him. More than a month after Dennis disappeared, a man named Harold Key reported something strange while hiking several miles away in Rowan's Creek. He and his family heard a sharp, distant scream echo through the woods, followed moments later by the sight of a disheveled man hurrying into the trees with something slung over his shoulder. The Keys described the man as rough-looking, wild, unkempt, and moving fast like he didn't want to be seen. Authorities investigated but could never confirm a connection to Dennis's case. Still, the image stayed with them. A figure, half man, half beast, something human or maybe not. No trace, no remains. The only possible clue was a single footprint about a mile from the field. Faint, partial, and so uncertain that even rangers couldn't say if it was Dennis's at all. As many searchers later reflected, it felt as though the mountain itself had taken him. He simply vanished. Weeks turned into months, and the Martin family never stopped searching. Dennis's father returned again and again, walking the same trails, scanning the same ridges. The case drew national attention, even congressional scrutiny. But after the official search ended, 3 months after Dennis had vanished, all that remained were questions and stories. With no trace of Dennis found anywhere in the park, his parents began to believe he might have somehow been taken out of it, that he'd been abducted and carried far beyond the search radius. They couldn't reconcile the fact that thousands of trained searchers, dogs, and aircraft had combed miles and miles of the mountains and turned up nothing. To William and his wife, that absence of evidence meant only one thing. Someone had taken their boy and gotten him out of the park before anyone even knew he was gone. It was the only explanation that made sense in a place that had offered nothing back. Years later, a group of ginseng hunters claimed they had discovered what appeared to be the skeletal remains of a small child deep within the park, in the remote Tremont's Big Hollow area of Tennessee, miles beyond where the official search had ended. They said the bones were scattered near a stream bed, clothing faded and torn, but they didn't report their discovery right away. Fear of legal trouble and reopening old wounds kept them silent for years. When they finally came forward, the site had already been overtaken by time, floods, animals, and shifting earth had erased nearly every trace. Authorities could find nothing to confirm their story. Yet, to many, it felt like one more missing piece of a puzzle that never stopped haunting these mountains. Some blamed the terrain, others whispered about abduction. Over the years, 3 theories emerged as the most likely explanations: that Dennis was abducted, that he was killed by a wild animal, or that he became disoriented and perished somewhere in the unforgiving terrain. His body never found. And then came the theories that no one wanted to say out loud: that Dennis had been taken by something or someone not entirely human. Locals talked of feral people, of wild men who lived deep in the Smokies, remnants of old mountain families who'd long since disappeared from modern life. They were said to survive by scavenging, hunting, and sometimes taking what or who they needed. The stories go back generations. Hikers glimpsing figures watching from the trees, campsites raided in the night, strange cries echoing through the hollers. Whether born from fear or memory, the legend of the feral people still lingers, and it wasn't long before Dennis's disappearance became tangled in that folklore, the kind of story people still lower their voices to tell. Today, the disappearance of Dennis Martin remains one of the most haunting mysteries in national park history, a case that still chills even veteran rangers. In Appalachia, there's an old belief: the mountains choose who stays. Maybe that's why Dennis's story endures, because it feels less like a case file and more like a warning. If the mountains can take a child without a trace, what else do they keep hidden? Dennis's story isn't an isolated one. The Appalachian Trail is beautiful and unforgiving. It runs more than 2,000 miles through some of the most rugged, remote land in America, and every year, people vanish into it. The trail stretches roughly 2,200 miles through 14 states, crossing 6 national parks, 8 national forests, and hundreds of miles of untouched wilderness. Thousands of hikers attempt full-through hikes each year. Countless more take day trips or weekend treks. But for all of its foot traffic, the Appalachian Trail remains one of the easiest places in America to disappear, by accident or by choice. The National Park Service responds to hundreds of search and rescue calls along the AT corridor every year. Most end safely, but not all. Since its completion in the 1930s, dozens of hikers remain unaccounted for, and the patterns are always the same: sudden weather, steep terrain, poor visibility, and silence that swallows sound. People go missing in the mountains for 100 different reasons. Fog rolls in faster than you think, the trail fades into the trees, a wrong step leads you to a fall you don't come back from. Exposure sets in, hypothermia takes hold. Sometimes it's an animal, sometimes it's another person, and sometimes there's no reason anyone can name. Tracks that stop mid-trail, camps left behind in perfect order, bodies never found. Those are the cases that keep rangers awake. Even the most seasoned hikers talk about it, that feeling of being watched, the quiet moment when the forest goes still, and every instinct in your body tells you you're not alone. The wilderness does something to the mind. Out here, awe and fear share the same edge. Just 7 years after Dennis Martin vanished, another Tennessee family would send their child into these same mountains. 16-year-old Trenny Gibson was hiking with her classmates, and by day's end, she too was gone. October 8th, 1976, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. A clear, cold Friday afternoon, the kind of fall day that makes the mountains burn gold and crimson. Only 10 miles from where Dennis Martin vanished, another Knoxville family unknowingly stepped into the same nightmare. 16-year-old Teresa Lynn Gibson, known as Trenny, joined a school field trip with 40 other students from Bearden High. The trip itself had been a surprise. Their horticulture teacher, Mr. Dunlap, had kept the destination secret from both students and parents, hoping to delight the class with an unexpected day studying plants in the Great Smoky Mountains. No one knew where they were headed until the bus arrived at the trailhead. So once there, Mr. Dunlap explained that the group would hike a portion of the Appalachian Trail to study native flora at 2 stops: Clingman's Dome Mountain in Tennessee and their turnaround point at Andrews Bald in North Carolina. He instructed the students to return to the bus, parked at Clingman's Dome, by 3:30 p.m. sharp. The trail stretched about 2 miles each way, well marked and considered an easy hike, though a few spots along the route could be deceptively dangerous, with narrow ridges and steep drop-offs if anyone wandered off its path. The students began their trek. It was meant to be a light scenic day in the woods, a few hours surrounded by color and mountain air. But by sunset, the trip had turned from a quiet class outing into the beginning of a mystery. One student was missing. Trenny Gibson was known for her quiet, dependable nature and close bond with her family. Thoughtful and artistic, she loved plants, animals, and nature. Friends described her as kind, mature for her age, and grounded. On the day she vanished, Trenny wore a brown plaid jacket, a blue and white striped sweater, blue jeans, and blue Adidas shoes. Warm enough for the chill, but light enough for a hike that should have ended by mid-afternoon. During the hike, she had been walking with a small group of 2 or 3 classmates. One of them, Robert Simpson, was a year older and happened to be her brother Robert Gibson Jr.'s best friend. The group stayed together for most of the hike, chatting as they made their way along the trail. By about 3:30 p.m., most of the students had finished the hike and gathered back at the bus. As Mr. Dunlap began counting heads, he realized Trenny wasn't there. At first, he assumed she was just lagging behind and decided to wait. But as the minutes stretched into nearly half an hour, worry began to set in. Two of the students in Trenny's group, including Robert Simpson, told Mr. Dunlap that the last time they'd seen her was near Andrews Bald. Trenny had mentioned she wanted to start heading back to the bus, but the others wanted to stay a little longer. So she left ahead of them, planning to catch up with another cluster of students a little farther down the trail. Two other classmates later said they saw Trenny at around 2:50 p.m. while they rested along the trail, roughly 3/4 of a mile from the parking lot. She was walking ahead of them in the direction of Klingman's Dome. About 200 yards up the path, just around a bend, they noticed her crouch down as if to look at something in the woods. Then, without a sound, she stepped off the trail and disappeared. When they reached the spot where she had been, there was no sign of her, no movement, no sound. They called her name several times but got no answer. Assuming she'd rejoined the trail farther ahead, they continued walking. But that was the last time anyone ever saw her. When deputies organized the first small search crew, they reminded everyone of one unsettling truth. Sound doesn't carry in these woods. The dense canopy and thick undergrowth absorb noise almost completely. So, if Trenny had been calling for help, no one, not even those within shouting distance, would have heard her. By nightfall, rangers and volunteers were combing the trail. The initial search went on until nearly 3 a.m., with flashlights cutting through the fog and cold. When dawn came, they brought in tracking dogs, using Trenny's unwashed clothing her family had provided to give them her scent. The dogs quickly picked it up along the Appalachian Trail right near the spot where the two students had last seen her. But then, suddenly the dogs veered off in a completely different direction, far from where Trenny's school bus would have been waiting. Their path led through the woods to a narrow side road. Investigators found cigarette butts and beer cans there, the same kind discovered back on the trail. Afterwards, the trail just ended. Just like Dennis, her trail ended mid-step, as if she'd walked into the trees and never came back out. If the scent trail was right, it meant one of two things. Either Trenny willingly met someone there and got into their car, or she was abducted and forced inside. National Guard troops and hundreds of volunteers scoured more than 10 square miles of rugged terrain. Through steep ravines, dense brush, and freezing rain, helicopters circled, dogs tracked, but no trace was ever found. Not a footprint, not a thread. Then came the storm that wiped away what little hope remained. As the search dragged on, theories followed. Some said Trenny slipped into a ravine and died of exposure. Others believed she'd been abducted. Students even recalled a man in khaki near the trail, and her scent ending at the road seemed to support it. Authorities, however, leaned toward a runaway theory, pointing to the beer cans and cigarette butts found near the trail. But there was no evidence to back it up, and they dismissed abduction outright. Trenny's family never accepted that. She'd left her ID, belongings, and over $1,000 in her bank account untouched. They were certain that she hadn't left by choice. To them, there were only two possibilities. She'd been taken, or she'd been killed inside the park. Early on, quiet suspicions formed around Robert Simpson, Trenny's classmate, her brother's best friend, and one of the last people to see her. Several students said his whereabouts during the final 45 minutes of the hike couldn't be confirmed. He told investigators he'd gone off alone to track a bear before returning to the bus by 3:30 p.m. Right on time. Robert came from an affluent family. His father later became the county DA, and though some whispered he'd had a crush on Trenny, nothing was ever proven. Still, his decision to wander off, unarmed and without telling anyone, raised concern, as did his defensive behavior toward her family. The day after Trenny disappeared, Trenny's brother Robert Gibson Jr. noticed her comb sitting on Robert Simpson's dashboard, one she'd always carried and never left behind. When confronted, Robert Simpson claimed she'd given it to him before the field trip, asking him to keep it safe. Another strange detail to this case is a year before Trenny vanished, a Bearden High School student named Kelvin Bowman had broken into her family's home. Trenny's mother shot him in the foot, and in court he swore revenge, vowing to kill Trenny. Though later released and still attending school, records confirmed he was in class the day she disappeared. So theories about potential suspects circulated over the years. Robert Simpson remained under quiet scrutiny, as did Mr. Dunlap, the only teacher on the field trip. Dunlap actually resigned from Bearden High shortly after Trenny's disappearance, and he and his ex-wife relocated to Oregon. His ex-wife later told reporters that they had moved because he suffered a mental breakdown after the incident. Another theory suggested Trenny's death may have been accidental, that she died during the hike in front of a few classmates who panicked and covered it up. Some believe a prank or confrontation went horribly wrong. When outsiders pressed townspeople or former students about the case, they were told to stop asking questions. Some even received threats. Trenny's sister Tina later revealed that a few of Trenny's jewelry pieces resurfaced in the possession of another student after she vanished. The family never got those pieces back, and it's unclear if police ever followed up. Trenny's body was never recovered, and despite decades of theories, not a single trace of her has ever been found. Whatever happened to her may forever remain buried in the Smokies, hidden beneath the same ridges that have taken so many before her. Some locals believe the land itself took her, just as they did Dennis Martin. 2 kids from Knoxville, 7 years apart, gone from the same park. Different days, same story, the woods open and never give back. Searchers claimed they heard faint screams in the wind. Others said they felt watched from the tree line just as they had during the hunt for Dennis Martin. Over time, the disappearances became part of the Smoky Mountain folklore. Stories of wild men, feral families, and strange camps hidden deep in the hollers. But some say the mountains don't just keep their secrets underground. They keep them alive, and that's where the oldest stories begin. The ones about those who live below. The mountains never gave answers about Dennis Martin or Trenny Gibson. But the stories people told after started pointing underground. Because beneath the Smokies runs another world. Tunnels, mines, and cave systems stretching for hundreds of miles. Most sealed, some not. During the coal mining era of the 1800s and early 1900s, thousands of shafts were carved into the Appalachian spine. Many later collapsed or flooded. Miners spoke of knocks that answered their own, voices echoing in the dark, and shapes moving just beyond lantern light. Abandoned rail and limestone tunnels became refuge for the desperate and forgotten. If something or someone wanted to disappear, it wouldn't have to go far. Stories of the so-called wild men in Appalachia stretch back nearly 200 years. The earliest accounts came from farmers near Boone, North Carolina, who spoke of a huge, flame-eyed figure stalking their fields after dark. A decade later, a Tennessee newspaper reported something half-human moving through the Nolichucky Gorge, leaving behind oversized footprints and mauled hunting dogs. In 1877, a group of gold miners traveling through Globe Valley in Caldwell County, North Carolina, claimed they encountered what they called a wild man. They said he stood well over 6 feet tall, his body covered in thick, matted hair, his skull oddly shaped like a funnel. When he saw the miners, he pounded his chest and sprinted into the forest with impossible speed. When they followed, rifles ready, they found a cave deep in the hills filled with scattered animal bones, signs that something had been living there for quite some time. By the 1890s, stories like these were everywhere. In East Tennessee, people spoke of the wild man of Chilhowie, a creature described as grotesque with long talon-like nails, tusk-like teeth, and a tangled beard that hung to his waist. 4 hunters claimed they'd caught him, but said he overpowered them and vanished into the woods. Later, a crew reportedly captured him and sent him to an asylum. Around the same time, loggers in Kentucky swore they saw a pale, growling figure slip into the dark mouth of the Cumberland Caverns, too human to be a myth, but not human enough to understand. These weren't internet campfire tales, they were headlines, and the descriptions hardly changed. Human, but not quite. Some historians suggest early sightings came from escaped prisoners or isolated families surviving off-grid. Others trace them to indigenous legends of the Moon-Eyed People, short, nocturnal, and described as inhuman-looking beings with pale eyes adapted to the dark. Another theory claims these so-called feral people are descendants of Civil War deserters who fled into the mountains and never came back down, adapting generation after generation in complete isolation. Witnesses who claim to have seen them describe pale, disfigured figures, their features warped from inbreeding, eyes milky white, and voices reduced to clicks, growls, and barks. They're said to have cannibalistic tendencies and live cut off from the outside world for centuries. Over time, these stories merged into one enduring belief that something still lives beneath Appalachia, half human, half memory. The myth has inspired countless depictions in pop culture, from The Descent and Deliverance to the Wrong Turn series, each one echoing the same primal fear of being hunted by what humanity left behind. In the age of social media, alleged wildman encounters began circulating online, reigniting the legend for a new generation. One popular theory even ties the mystery back to Dennis Martin's case. Some speculate that the reason Green Berets were deployed during the 1969 search was because they'd encountered and allegedly cleared out a group of feral men in the Smokies. The speculation only grew after reports surfaced that Harold Key heard a loud scream in the woods and saw a man running with something slumped over his shoulder in the same area Dennis had vanished. There's no official record of the Green Beret deployment and their alleged mission of clearing out feral people. The Green Beret mission reports are vague, and the FBI released little about their involvement, leaving the public to fill in the blanks. While researching Dennis's case, I went down rabbit hole after rabbit hole trying to understand why the military, specifically the Green Berets, and even President Nixon were involved. I couldn't find anything concrete, but I do find it strange how much military force was deployed for a missing child case. Whether or not the speculation about the Green Berets eliminating a group of feral people holds any truth, the secrecy surrounding the mission leaves room for unsettling possibilities. Even now, reports still keep that pattern alive. Rangers speak of raided camps and bare footprints too large for boots. Hunters describe figures crouched at the tree line, gone when the light hits them. Hikers swear they heard footsteps pacing behind them through miles of silence. And then there are the modern witnesses. In May of 2019, a couple visiting Mingo Falls in North Carolina posted about their encounter online. They'd arrived early, just after sunrise. The parking lot was empty, the air damp and cool, and the only sound was the creek rolling over stone. As they climbed the long wooden steps toward the waterfall, they stopped dead. Someone or something was already there. At the base of the falls stood a tall, gaunt figure, naked, covered in coarse, uneven hair. Its ribs jutted beneath a narrow chest, its head oddly misshapen, and its skin visible beneath the hair as if it were half man, half something else. When the woman called out to her husband, a stench hit them, thick and sour, like rot and vomit. The creature's eyes were pale and cloudy, its expression vacant. In one hand, it held what looked like a child's blanket, filthy, soaked, dragging in the current, red liquid that looked like blood all over its mouth. Then, without a sound, it crouched low and slipped behind the rushing water as if into an opening in the rock itself. The couple fled back down the trail, hearts pounding. They swore it wasn't an animal or a Bigfoot, but something unmistakably human. Just wrong. Maybe these stories are just the mind projecting fear onto an endless wilderness. But from 1839 to now, the details haven't changed. Maybe the wild men are a way to name what waits in the dark. Or maybe they're the ones who never came back up from the mines. Either way, the mountains keep their secrets underground. But sometimes those secrets don't stay buried. We've talked about the ones that live beneath the mountains, the wild men, the forgotten. But in Cherokee stories, the danger didn't just come from below. It came from above, with wings. Long before miners or settlers, the Cherokee told of a being that moved through the night air, feeding on the dying, a creature so feared that even speaking its name was said to draw it closer. They called it the Raven Mocker, one of the most feared spirits in Cherokee legend. By day, it wore the skin of an old, frail human, but when darkness fell, it revealed its true form. Long black wings, red eyes, and a cry that sounded like a person's final breath. Wherever a raven mocker flew, death followed before morning. It was said to steal the hearts of the dying without leaving a single wound, using its talons to pierce into the body, wrapping its claws around a person's soul, and feeding on it until nothing human was left. Even other witches feared it. Medicine men performed protective rites over the sick, praying to keep the raven mocker at bay and listening through the night for the rush of wings or a cry that wasn't quite human. Unlike most creatures we'd call cryptids, the raven mocker isn't a distant myth or a beast of the wilderness. It's something far more human. The stories say it seeks out those already standing at death's edge, the weak, the sick, the ones fading. Its call cuts through the night like a dying breath, and those who hear it know what's coming. It hunts the vulnerable, drawn to the final flicker of life like a moth to a flame. That's what makes it terrifying. Not that it's a monster, but that it remembers what it once was. As Cherokee lands overlapped with the Appalachian frontier, settlers began to adopt and twist the story. Over time, the raven mocker was no longer seen as a spirit, but as something physical that stalked the woods. A dark, winged shape was said to circle cabins at dusk. People spoke of hearing harsh, rasping breaths mixed with bird-like screams in the night. The line between spirit and creature blurred, and before long, the legend merged with tales of the wild men, tall, hair-covered figures that prowled the ridges. Where the Cherokee saw a messenger of death, the settlers began to see a beast of flesh and blood. Modern folklorists have noted unsettling overlaps between raven mocker legends and southern Bigfoot encounters. Both are tied to death, to storms, to strange, mournful cries. Both are said to draw strength or fear from those who encounter them. Some Cherokee elders even say they're not different beings at all, but two halves of the same thing. A body becomes the wild men, and a soul becomes the raven mocker. Across eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, and northern Georgia, reports continue to surface in areas where both myths overlap. Locals wake to find clawed bird-like tracks in the dirt outside their homes, often followed by sickness or sudden loss. And hikers deep in the woods whisper about shapes that glide through the trees, wings that never flap, and movement that makes no sound at all. To the Cherokee, the raven mocker represented an unnatural hunger, a spirit feeding on life itself. To modern Appalachians, it's the same story told again in another form. That isolation, darkness, and desperation can twist the human spirit into something unrecognizable. Maybe the raven mocker and the wild men aren't opposites at all. Maybe they're mirrors, reflecting what the mountains make of us when we're left alone too long. In the end, every story, the vanishings, the wild men, the creatures that watch from the ridges, comes back to hunger. Hunger for warmth, for life, for something we lost when we left the woods. Maybe that's why the mountains keep calling people back, because whatever lives here still isn't done eating. The Appalachians are older than time as we measure it, older than bone, older than language. Every path carved through them is a reminder of something that went missing here. A child who vanished between two breaths, a girl who stepped off the trail and was never seen again, and the stories we tell to fill the silence they left behind. Some people say it's the land, that it swallows the lost whole, keeps their names buried under rock and root. Others say it's the people who never came back from it, the wild men, the watchers, the ones who forgot what it meant to be human. And then there are the older stories, the raven mocker, feeding on the last heartbeat of the dying, reminding us that hunger never really ends. Maybe that's what binds all of these stories together. Not monsters or curses or ghosts, just hunger. The hunger to survive, the hunger to understand what can't be explained, and the hunger of the mountains themselves to keep what they're given. Out here, nothing is ever truly gone. It's only waiting to be found. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Darkly Speaking. If you have your own paranormal encounter or scary story you'd like to share, I would love to hear from you. Please email darklyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com to send in your story. Also, if you want to keep up with more stories like this, make sure you're following along on socials at Darkly Speaking Podcast for more strange and chilling content. Leaving a quick rating or review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts also helps these stories reach more people who are just as curious about the dark and unexplained. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time with a brand new episode.